Hi everyone, it's a little chilly today here, and it was raining earlier, but here I am, still outdoors, which I love to be. I actually went and bought a Starbucks cold brew today because I'm dragging a little bit. I don't usually do that. But anyway, sometimes it's a necessity. So we have the final paragraph of the long, long diary entry of 8 April 1906, and it was a Saturday. And I don't think you can see it, but I actually have some egg on my face because yesterday I was talking about my confusion about the concluding line of that paragraph where Dmitri said that Gadan, Del Sal, and Olga had brought officers with them to Maria's birthday party, that Gadan and Del Sal had brought 2 each, and that Olga had brought 4. And I still don't know who Olga was, but despite the fact that Dmitri did a break and started a new paragraph, this does elucidate on that. And apparently these 2 officers from the 2nd Guards Rifle Battalion, his battalion, actually did each bring 2 officers, presumably from the battalion. And whoever Olga was, she brought 4 officers with her, but I don't know if they would have been from the battalion or not. So maybe this was little 10-year-old Olga, but could also be the Tsar's sister. But I go over this every time. I'm confused, and it's very annoying about not knowing who Olga is. So Maria had turned 16. This was her 16th birthday party. And Dmitri is definitely coming out of his shell a little bit. And yeah, I mean, I talked a little yesterday about that. I found it interesting that the children would develop these relationships with the officers who were included almost as though they were part of the family in some of these events. And yeah, I guess that makes sense. I guess it accords with what I read when I was translating the memoirs of the Admiral Fabritsky, who was the captain of the Polar Star. And he got to know the Tsar very well. And they, you know, when they were out on these yacht cruises, I've also seen pictures of the officers with the children, not as nannies, but just especially with the girls, just spending time with them. And it surprises me a little bit because you would think that with teenage girls there would be a definite danger that they would get crushes on these various officers, and if they were, you know, 17, 18, something like that, that they would actually have maybe illicit romances, or they would maybe want to marry morganatically. But I guess it was a risk they were willing to take. So let's dive in. And this is the Gadan and Del Sal were officers from the rifle battalion. Okay, Gadan brought Benyu and Butsev, very nice officers. Del Sal brought Bashkirev and Galindo, also very nice. And Olga brought 4, but such repulsive fellows that they aren't even worth talking about. The Carlos were there, the Haydens were there, and then the Konstantinovichi, Meyendorf, and Trepova, and the officers. So there were about 40 of us. Great. Aunt didn't bother me as much as I thought she would. She even let me greet the guard in front of her, which I didn't think would happen. Devil knows what's going on in San Francisco. There are horrible losses there. 30,000 people have perished. Just horrible. We're having wonderful weather. The ice isn't holding at all. We dug out our old boats from when we were children, and GM fell down today on his hip. It was terribly funny. Soon it will be 17th April, the 50th anniversary of my battalion. I am giving every officer my portrait in a nice frame. I had it taken by Busson, dressed in my parade uniform, and I went to Petersburg dressed that way, but fortunately in a closed carriage because of the bad weather. Yesterday I greeted my riflemen who were rehearsing for the parade and were getting wet, the poor things, in the rain that fell almost all day. Yesterday Aunt went back to Moscow. She told us we would be staying here until summer and then go straight to Ilinskaya. I was so pleased that it took all my self-control not to let my face show my immense joy when she told me. Aunt is letting me ride in the open air. Hurrah, that's so much fun. And she even said I could go with the Konstantinovich. This is horrible. I haven't done my homework in a single subject over the holiday, so I'll have to do all of it tomorrow. I can't write because GM is starting to read, and that's really annoying, but what can I do? I've written enough. 7 o'clock. Boy, I'll say you've written enough, kiddo. Okay, you know, it's a bit disconcerting, isn't it? He does have paragraph breaks, but then he'll do a paragraph break and resume the next paragraph talking about the same subject, which is what tripped me up on the whole officers thing. But then he'll go directly from something like the earthquake in San Francisco to talking about the weather there, or directly, you know, from going horseback riding with the Konstantinovich to, oh no, I haven't done my homework. But, you know, that's all right. That's just an idiosyncrasy of his. At this time in his life, he did get better with that. And it was his diary after all, so he could do whatever the heck he wanted. Okay, so we talked about the officers. This was a big party. 40 people for 16th birthday party. Well, okay. The Carlos were there. So the Carlos were, was it 2 girls and a boy, or 3 girls and a boy? I should be ashamed that I don't know this. Sorry about that. That's a helicopter. Hopefully it won't be circling around. Okay, because my godmother's mother was a Carlo. So these were the Duke of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, who was on his mother's side a member of the Russian imperial family and who lived in Russia. He had married morganatically, but that was accepted. You know, he wasn't that high in the succession. Actually, he wasn't in the succession at all because he was a Romanov on his mother's side, and it was allowed, and so he married morganatically, but the children of that marriage and the wife were all received, and my godmother's mother, who was one of these Carlo girls, was a lady-in-waiting to Alexandra, and she, I didn't meet her. She died, I believe, in the 70s. When I was still a child, but Sonia told me that that her mother, and now I'm not remembering her first name, that her mother had taken dancing classes with Dmitri. So I'm assuming that the Carlo children were at least some of the time going to Pavlovsk for the dancing lessons, and I don't know who the Haydens were. Meyendorf is the girl that Dmitri mentioned a few diary entries ago, that she reminded him of the famous Tata whom he'd had this terrible crush on. And then Trepova, and I'm thinking that, knowing what we know about Dmitri, I'm thinking that, yeah, that these were all kids that went to the dance class and that he knew them, and so he wasn't resisting going and being there at the party. And in fact, he really seems to have enjoyed himself, except that he didn't like the little pin the tail on the donkey kind of games. And I don't think when he's being sarcastic when he says, so there were about 40 of us. Great. And I'm leaning toward this being Aunt Ella and not Aunt Alex, because he doesn't mention he doesn't say that Aunt Alex went to the party, even though the daughters did, the little girls did. So Aunt didn't bother him as much as he thought she would. So what do we make of that? I think that, well, we all know, Dmitri liked to play the clown, and I think maybe he was thinking that Aunt was going to be strict with him and keep an eye on him and not let him do that. But she seems to have been, really improving her relationship with the children. Maybe, as they say, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And since they weren't living with her, starting in, maybe even before, but with the diary starting in January, they're already at Tsarskaya Selo. So they've gone back a couple times for a couple of days each time, but basically they've been living apart with her. So maybe she's genuinely missing them, and she sees that Dmitri is growing up, so she's backing off a little in being strict with him. All right. And she even let him greet the 2nd Battalion Guard in front of her, which he never thought was going to happen. So it might have been Alex, because she was the one who seems to have objected to that so much, but I think it was Ella. Okay, because we know Ella went to the party. We don't know that Alex did. So what happened in San Francisco? There was a big, horrible earthquake in 1906, and apparently the news spread around the world, and everybody knew about it. But Dmitri at least doesn't have accurate information. So on the new calendar, on the Gregorian calendar, it had happened on April 18th. So on 8th April, when Dmitri was writing about this, it would have been, I think, 5 days. It would have happened 5 days ago. And he says that 30,000 people had perished. Well, thank God that wasn't correct. It was 3,000 people who perished. I don't know if they were estimating at that time that maybe it would be 30,000 people, but I doubt it. I think he just misunderstood. Okay, so the ice is melting, and they dug out these little boats, kind of like, the word is more like rafts, but these little boats that they had when they were smaller children. GM fell down today on his hip. It was terribly funny. Well, the little monster laughing at poor old GM, but I'm sure GM didn't hurt himself. He probably fell in the snow. Okay, and the big news. The 50th anniversary of the Rifle Battalion, the 2nd Guards Rifle Battalion, is coming up. It will be on the 17th, and so this is really a chance for Dmitri to show how grown up he is, because this year he is going to be participating and in a very important role as the honorary commander of the battalion. And he's so excited about it, as you can see reading between the lines. And he's gone and had his photo taken by some French photographer who undoubtedly had a fancy studio in St. Petersburg that the aristocracy made use of. I'm a little surprised that a photographer that Buisson himself didn't come to Tsarskaya Selo and take the photo of this little Grand Duke. But he puts on his parade uniform, and he goes in the carriage to St. Petersburg. And I guess people at that point weren't driving cars, or at least cars hadn't taken over from carriages. And he expresses his relief that it was not an open carriage because the weather is bad. Well, you wouldn't think people would be going when it was still wintry in open carriages, but maybe they did. Maybe that was more typical. But, it would have definitely been a spectacle of this little Grand Duke in his parade uniform going in a carriage through St. Petersburg, and maybe he wasn't quite ready to be that much in the public eye. You couldn't blame him for that. But I do wish I knew, I wish there was some way to know if any of these photographs, these portrait photographs that he had made and put in the special frames, if any of those have survived, if there are any of those left in Russia or abroad. That would be something to have. Wow. But we're not talking about a lot, because he was only making them for the officers and not for the men of the battalion. Okay, and he greeted his rifleman, my rifleman, he says. Rather sweet. And they were rehearsing for the parade. They were getting wet, so the poor things, as he says, that is an expression that he uses very frequently, even as an adult, and even in English, when he writes in English as an adult. Oh my God, what a relief for him. Aunt is not going to be taking him and Maria back to Moscow. They are going to spend the whole spring there, and then not go to Moscow, but go straight to Ilinskaya. So it had been the custom of Sergei and Ella, and also Grand Duke Paul and his wife, to go every summer and spend every summer at Ilinskaya, the country estate on the Moscow River. And indeed, that was where Dmitri's mother died and where Dmitri was born. That doesn't seem to give him any qualms, so that's good. Ilinskaya technically belonged to him because it was left to him by his uncle Sergei in Sergei's will, but I'm sure there was a stipulation that Ella could have full access to it during the children's minority. And in fact, there may not have needed to be such a stipulation, because she was the one who was ultimately responsible for them. So technically, Nicholas was one of the guardians, and being the emperor was the chief guardian of Dmitri and Marie, but actual custody and actual decision-making had been given to Sergei and Ella, and it remained with Ella. So she was the ultimate authority in saying where the children were going to go, who was going to take care of them, who their tutors would be. Nicholas clearly ceded that to her. And so, in fact, we see that she's making the decision to let Dmitri go horseback riding outdoors, and not just in the manege where he was getting his lessons and learning to jump barriers. And that was a little stressful, like any other class where your performance is being scrutinized, but is very, very happy to be allowed to go riding outdoors. And apparently he hadn't been allowed to do that before, because Aunt was the one that had to make that decision. And so he's not only going to be allowed to ride outdoors, but he's going to be allowed to ride with his cousins, the Konstantinovichi. So Aunt is putting more trust in him that he will behave appropriately. And so she's giving him more privileges. Hopefully she didn't know that he hadn't done his homework. Boy, isn't that so universal? In every time and every place where children have had homework to do, when they've had a holiday, they have put their homework off until the very last minute. So we can all relate to that. Usually he enjoys it when GM is doing the reading in the evening, but boy, did he get into this diary entry. He doesn't even want to stop writing, even though, he said a lot. Maybe if GM hadn't started reading we would have had another 1 or 2 paragraphs of this diary entry. But you know, it's funny that GM was not making sure that he was doing his homework during the holidays. So generally speaking, you know, things have gotten less strict. I mean, I'm sure GM knows that Dimitri was pretty good about doing his homework, and GM probably had holiday activities of his own. So let us hope in the next diary entry that Dimitri will tell us that he didn't get in trouble and he was able to do his homework the next day. This was a Saturday, so he had all day Sunday to do 2 weeks worth of homework. Boy, that stresses me out even to think about. All right, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and come back next time. Bye.